So let's get the whole Mark 8 passage for today, Mark 8, 31 to 38 in the New Revised Standard Version. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said this all quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." And then Jesus called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "And if any of you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who will lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of God with the holy angels." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Will Willimon said, "The American church often presents the gospel as a solution to our problems, a technique for better marriages and smarter kids, a way to make nice people nicer and successful people even more successful. You hear a lot of, 'My life was a mess, but then I met Jesus and now everything's fixed.' And that's great. Problem is, actually meeting Jesus is messy and would probably scare the bejesus out of us. In today's gospel, Jesus told the disciples that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected and killed, and after 3 days rise again. Now, that last part would be great if we could skip all the suffering, rejection, and death. Peter agreed, because when he heard this, he took Jesus aside privately and rebuked him. A pretty strong word. "This must not happen to you because..." Well, maybe because Peter loved Jesus too much to see him suffer. Maybe because Peter had just minutes ago, literally minutes ago, proclaimed him the Messiah. And such things are not supposed to happen to messiahs. I mean, messiahs, what kind of messiah gets killed? Or maybe because I'm just looking to be a nicer, more successful person. But in response to Peter's private scolding, Jesus turned and publicly rebuked Peter. And if that wasn't embarrassing enough, Jesus called Peter Satan, because Jesus said he was putting human things, like avoiding conflict, avoiding pain, in front of divine things. And this is the, quote, easier part of today's text. The Son of Man must undergo great suffering, rejection, and death. And then, that's when Jesus called out to the crowd, "Hey, and if any of you want to become my followers..." Those crowds had just kept growing, and despite telling people to keep things quiet, more and more people followed Jesus. And why not? I mean, he was the best show in town. Free food and entertainment. Imagine watching demons scream as they come out of the possessed. Healings of one kind after another, the blind, the lame, the diseased. He walked on water, calmed the storm, dared to argue with Pharisees. One day, he fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And just a couple of verses before today's reading, he fed another 4,000 with 7 loaves left over. And yet, after all of that, Jesus said to the disciples, "And you still don't understand?" So, Jesus made the first of 3 attempts to make it crystal clear. So understand this. If any of you want to become my followers, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Now I want to sit with that for a minute, because he didn't say, if any of you want to become my followers, you must love God and love your neighbors as yourself. and love your enemies, and forgive 70 times 7, and be more compassionate, and etc. And those things are all true. And feed the hungry, and clothe the naked, and shelter the homeless. Those things are all true as well. But it's not the love thing that makes following Jesus difficult. It's the whole deny yourself and take up your cross thing. On Thursday, once again, we had a powerful conversation about this text at our luncheon lectionary on Zoom. And if you've ever thought about joining us, please do. It's a great group. So among the things we discussed was an observation by Phil that only those with a self can deny their self. Wow. And with Safe House Denver as our mission partner this month, that's even more obvious. For survivors of domestic violence, it's not that they don't have a self, but many have been told that they should simply accept their abuse as their, quote, cross to bear. Tragically, often by pastors or family members, that if only they loved their spouses more, they would stop being abused. So let me be clear. This is outrageous. This is false. And if that's what your religion tells you, run like hell and rebuke it as you go, because that's truly the logic of Satan. Again, Jesus said, if any of you want to become my followers, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Now, what's denying yourself? Well, it's more than not having a second cookie, or a second glass of wine, or getting a house with a bigger backyard. I mean, it's not a Lenten discipline. That's all of those are just too small. Jesus pairs this line with, and take up your cross. So we might think of taking up your cross as a personal burden, something with which you uniquely struggle. And yes, but not really, at least not here. It's not a difficulty or a particular weight on your shoulders. And that's not to dismiss your own personal struggles and burdens. It's just not the meaning of this text. So perhaps we should ask, when Jesus spoke of crosses, what did the crowd hear? Take up your cross. Crosses littered the landscape. I mean, the cross wasn't unique to Jesus. The Roman Empire crucified thousands of people. In fact, when Jesus was just a boy, Romans crucified 2,000 Galileans at once. Romans put up crosses like billboards, advertising Caesar's supremacy and the fate of any who dared to challenge it. And in that way, the cross is very much like the lynching tree, as Dr. James Cone writes. In both cases, the purpose was to strike terror into the subject community. And black men, women, and children were lynched, hung from trees for no reason at all, for looking in the wrong direction. But the point wasn't the infraction, it was the terror. Like Confederate flags and erecting statues of Robert E. Lee and the militarized police forces in places like Ferguson, Missouri, and that whole debacle at the U.S. Capitol. They're all warnings meant to terrorize. And terror was the point for Rome, too. Crosses were used as instruments of a torturous death against anyone whom they deemed a threat. The cross was a weapon and a message for anyone who dared to question Rome's occupation. So then, of all things, why would Jesus tell people to pick up a cross? We sing sentimental songs about old rugged crosses, but the cross, like a lynching tree, like the executioner's chair on death row, would have sent nice potential followers fleeing. In fact, I wonder how many he still had at the end of that day. I can picture one person after another sort of slipping away from the back, running for their lives. A passage like this should seriously make us question whether we want to have anything to do with this Jesus movement. But then again, what good is a religion that only asks you politely to be nice. Martin Luther King Jr. said, any religion that professes concern for the souls of men and is not equally concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is a spiritually moribund religion, only waiting for the day to be buried. Well, Jesus does give one very compelling reason why we should stay. He asks, what good is gaining the whole world, but losing your soul? Perhaps we could say, well, you can have your soul or you can have your stuff. But not really, because that's too small. It's too individualistic. Perhaps a more appropriate question, among others, what good is having everything you want if you've sold everyone out to get it? With Jesus, there's always a collective impact to consider. For example, Jesus didn't just heal individuals. He healed individuals so they could be reunited with their communities. That part is hard to fully comprehend because Americans, white Americans, make things about the individual, almost like our civil religion. The whole mask thing baffles me. It's my right to choose not to wear a mask, but what kind of religion would go along with putting the whole community at risk of infection because it's my right to do so? It's our right to hold super spreader events? But on behalf of 524,670 dead people, as of this morning and counting, I ask, what good is gaining the whole world, but losing your soul? Of course, I had the same question for Jerry Falwell and company, especially as they bow at the religion of our literal golden calf Trump sculpture this weekend. And if you haven't seen it, you got to Google it. But Jesus said, if any of you want to become my followers, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. The cross, this thing used as an instrument of suffering and death, of terror and oppression. Dr. Cohn has been asked many times how the truth of the black experience of lynching and the cross of Christianity can be reconciled. And he said both the cross and the lynching tree represented the worst in human beings, and at the same time, an unquenchable ontological thirst for life that refuses to let the worst determine our final meaning. They are transformed symbols that represent both death and the promise of redemption, judgment and the offer of mercy, suffering and the power of hope. A religion that is real. Because, like today's gospel says, there is no rising on the third day without transforming the experience of suffering, rejection, and death. Now, I don't know why Jesus said the Son of Man must suffer, but certainly he understands that all humans do. And to be human is to know rejection and death. And so to be in solidarity with suffering humanity, he must experience life as we do. And by doing so, Jesus shows us by following how to transform it and how the cross represents hope. Just like Dr. Cohn said, God took the evil of the cross and the lynching tree and transformed them both into the triumphant beauty of the divine. And if the followers of Jesus would actually, truly, and finally confront the evil and terrorism of white supremacy with repentance and reparation, we will be a triumphantly beautiful nation. But nice won't do it. Nice isn't enough. We must deny ourselves and take up our cross. And if your religion doesn't ask that of you, lose it. Take up the cross of Jesus instead. He asks, will you come and follow me?